Hello there. Welcome to Prescott Area Arts and Humanities Council's My Life in Art. And I am John Meyer. I'm the president of PAC and your host for the interview. If you are watching this, then you know that we are on Wednesday nights at 8 o'clock and Saturday mornings at 10 o'clock on channels 64 and 65. Or you can stream it at prescottmediacenter.org. So let folks know so that you can see these as well. This is the November version of My Life in Art. And next in December, we will have Jonathan Best, the pianist and actor, will be here with us, and that will be December 15th. So feel free to come down to stage 2 and join us for talking with Jonathan Best. Today, we have director and teacher Bruce Lanning from Prescott Center for the Arts.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So please welcome Bruce.
Thank you.
And we'll start off with the usual question, which is where were you born, and if different, where did you grow up? Where were you raised?
Well, I was born in Cambridge, Ohio, a small town, east of Columbus, and 1941. And we moved various times up to Cleveland and back to Cambridge. My father loved the small town, and that's really where I began doing some things, taking some drama classes and that kind of thing. We moved up to Cleveland, the suburb of Cleveland, and that's where I spent most of my working life too, in various suburbs. I got a job teaching at Westlake High School back in the early 60s, and had a chance there to, this is going farther than your question, but yeah, but I had a chance to do some plays there in high school, and then when I started teaching, the second year I was there, I had been, as an extracurricular activity, they required that you do this. I was the cheerleader advisor.
Interesting. Wow.
They didn't know what to do with me, and I didn't have anything. I didn't have anything to do there aside from just make sure the money was collected in the proper way. But the following year, the drama teacher decided to not do the plays any longer, direct the plays, and so I took that over. And I said, well, I'll do one play with these people. And they wanted to do a melodrama, so I started off with that. And we ended up doing 3 productions that year, and 3 for 14 years after that.
Nice.
So that's how I got into this whole business.
Very good. And how long have you been in Prescott, and what was the reason for moving here?
I've been in Prescott 10 years, 15 years now, isn't it? This is going to be our 16th year. We moved here to retire. We had looked around while Susan was still working. I'd retired. I had run a small community theater for 20 years. I was the managing director, we called it there. It was really the artistic director. And I did all kinds of plays there for 20 years. And I thought after I retired from high school teaching, I was only 51 at the time, and I'd been 30 years in that business. So I decided I would try to do something to really build that theater now that I had more time to do it. Before I was doing 4 or 5 shows a year plus teaching, and I was an English teacher, so I was grading papers all the time, you know. All my spare time was taken up with that. I say it today, I know my grandchildren better than I do my own kids because I had to spend all that time doing that. Well, we got them into those productions too, so that was good. But I've been here since then, and after a year or so, I told Susan, my wife, I wasn't going to do theater for a while. We were going to take some time off and just do some other things. But it only lasted a year, approximately, and I started working at Embry-Riddle teaching English over there because they always need English teachers to grade the papers that the PhDs don't want to do, you know, and that's the way I was. So I started doing that, and after a while I found out that because of my experience in theater that they would let me do an acting class there. So I did that, and then they let me do a film class, and I was in heaven, you know. Yeah. I loved doing those things. And I've been an old film addict for a long, long time. So the second year after that, I met this guy who worked over here. All of a sudden I've gone blank on his name. It's terrible.
It'll come
But
back to you.
what?
It'll come back to you.
It will come back to me. But he was teaching English there also, and he said that he's working with PCA, and why don't you come and sit on the committee, you know? And as I tell people now that I'm chairman of that production committee, if you show up once, you're on the list, and and you never get off that list,
right.
you know. And that's what's happened basically. I've been on that I guess about since 2003. I think that's when I started. And it took me a few years to go through the mentorship program and all of that to become a director, but I went through all of that, and with Gene Lippincott, who was a great friend of mine, to help me out there, and the rest is history, I guess.
Absolutely. So it sounds like your real first exposure into theater was as a high school student. Would you say that was your first significant exposure to art, or was there something else that
Well,
came
there are
along?
little things. I seem to like it all along. You know what influenced me more than anything else? I was thinking about this coming over here. Was radio. I mean, I'm an old guy, and so the experience I had with drama was with the kids' radio programs in the afternoon, and they had quite a few at about 4 o'clock when you get home, you know. And even earlier, I evidently listened to music, because when my brother Bob was born and I was just 2 years old, I evidently sat on the bed when my mother came home and sang Pistol Packin' Mama. And I have no knowledge or remembrance of any of that, but I knew that I was quite a singer at that time, and as all you know, singing and dancing is my life now. You know? But I mean, I've done 45 musicals, I think, now altogether over my directing career, and one of the reasons I can do that is that I do know music. I studied piano for 10 years, and the singing and the dancing went out. My mother was from a Quaker family. That says it all right there, I think. But both of them, that wasn't a way to make any kind of a living, so I never really thought of that. But then there was live television, and I learned more about acting, I think, from watching live television in the 50s. The other day, TCM, Turner Classic Movies, had a kind of retrospective of James Dean, because he was one of the early ones, a young guy that caught attention to an American audience there on television, and they had one of these 1-hour dramas every night, I think, all the way through. The ones that people remember now were Playhouse 90, but that was almost the end of that whole thing. Well, I watched one of those James Dean things the other night, and of course he was one of the first of the slew of young method actors, and he's in this production of a short story that I used to teach called I'm a Fool, and he was terrible. It was so self-indulgent and everything. And here was Eddie Albert, who was the narrator of this piece, who was just wonderful, you know. And, you know, nobody probably even remembers Eddie Albert, but, you know, aside from in the, what was the end, Green Acres,
right.
when that was the end of his career, sort of.
He was
you
in
know.
the film version of Oklahoma.
He was.
Played Allie Hackham.
And he played all kinds of major roles on Broadway,
Yes.
along with David Wayne is another one people don't know very well.
Right.
But it led me to see acting in a different way than maybe most people did. And I found myself always wanting to get the actors, when I started directing, out toward the audience. I want to see their faces, you know. It's when I tell people acting is different than movies, because, you know, the audience can't get up and walk down the aisle and look at you up close and then go back to their seats. Although there's some modern theater that tries that, I think, you know. But I learned quite a bit about that, and about the method, what I liked, and I think I did probably like James Dean when I was young, but I see the problems he had later on. He would get stuck in just thinking about something, and, and these people were standing around wanting to go on with the lines, and he couldn't do it. And sometimes it just didn't even seem appropriate to the action. So.
Right.
So there were those things too, and then I did a class in theater when I was in junior high school, and I got a major role there. And in high school, I got we were trying to do juvenile delinquency things in 1958, you know, and there was a play that had been done on television with Sal Mineo called Dino, and it was made into a movie. You might remember that, some of you, and so we did a version of that on the stage. My high school director, Robert Smith, I remember. And I got to play, of course, I was typecast like a lot of you probably were in place because I had glasses, horn rim glasses, so I was the psychologist, you know. And a friend of mine was Dino and with all these problems. I got into other things too, and I never thought about doing that for a living. What I wanted to do was be a stand-up comedian. And because I just love these guys, you know. And Steve Allen was sort of my idol too. I wore horn rim glasses. I even put that on my pieces of paper, you know, the little glasses in my name. And I did try it for a while, but it was 1958 in the summer of '59, just before I went to college, and it just didn't go anywhere. I mean, there weren't any clubs at that time. There wasn't anything like that. But you know, I was listening to Bill Cosby and Bob Newhart particularly I liked, and who was the guy who was always on the phone? Shelley Berman. And I learned to do some of those. Maxwell Smart began too then, and I was doing his voice. And Jonathan Winters probably was my favorite of all of them because I liked the improv. Yeah, he was from Ohio. Yeah, a lot of these guys were from the Midwest. Bob Newhart's from Chicago, I think. I know that's where he broke into the business anyway. He never was really a stand-up comic. He just did those albums and then did that later. We saw him over at Yavapai College when he came up here years ago. And he was funnier than I've ever seen him before, just because he didn't have to worry about what he said as much, you know, in that kind of audience. But anyway, I know that just didn't go, and then I got into college, and I was the editor of the literary magazine there. I was a real strong English major, and I got into writing. I read the New Yorker all the time, the talk of the town, and I tried that style a lot. And I liked Benchley and Thurber and all those people. And so when I got to grad school, I went to Case Western Reserve for grad school, and undergrad was Miami University, a rival to your College of Ohio University.
Yes.
I was there a little earlier than you were.
A little.
But it's surprising to me how many people that we know here have really done stuff in Ohio. I mean, Ed Gates is here, and he went to University of Cincinnati for a while and worked down in that area before going off to Atlanta and so on. And you went to Ohio. Kate Towle was a graduate of Bowling Green, so we hit most of the colleges there, except for Ohio State, I guess. I don't know what was going on with them. So anyway, when I went to college, it was kind of a thing. But what really got me back to theater was my wife Susan. I met her in what was it, 62, I guess it was. And she was working in the theater there, and they didn't have these lush theaters on these college campuses. That college we just went to, Miami University, a few weeks ago, well, this summer. And it's like a rich man's school now, and it wasn't that way then. But in fact, where they had the drama department was in the condemned building. It was an old building.
Wow.
And I went there one time, and she was, I knew about her, but we'd met before, just had been in the same class, but she was there groveling on the floor in a theater in the round thing, much like this, playing a leprous boy. I remember that's the way it was in the program, a leprous boy, Susan. You know? Yeah. So she had done makeup and taken classes and everything, and I didn't do that because I was finishing this major in English, and she was an English major too. She graduated a year before me, but when we got married and I started teaching, she was working at Lakewood Little Theater that became Beck Center there now. And so I got to know those people with parties and so on over there, and decided to try Huntington Playhouse, which was their summer theater sort of for Lakewood Little Theater. It was one of the first of the community theaters in the whole country in 1930s, and a lot of talent came through there on the west side too, which is unusual. So it began me thinking about that, and so I tried out for some roles at Huntington, and I did a funny thing that happened on the way to the Forum, and I did the one that Casey Knight talks about being her first play. It was my first community theater play too. Any Number Can Die, it's called. You know, I played the villain in that. That was where I had one of my worst experiences ever on the theater in my brief acting career. Was we had this secret panel that opened up, and I was standing back there all in black, and I was supposed to wear this black hood and come out in the dark, and the director had this blue light, black light, you know, that would all of a sudden shine and all. And then I was just supposed to go around, look, and go into the panel in the fireplace. It was a real elaborate set. Well, the director he was always a kind of a talky sort, like I've become really. And he was standing over here, and we started talking, and I'm in this slot, and this guy is ready to pull this thing open for me. And all of a sudden we realized the cue's coming up. So he pulled the slot. I put the hat on. That's kind of prophetic. This is what happened to me there. I put the hat on in a hurry, the hood, you know, and I got it on backwards.
Oh.
And the little screen part in there that enabled me to see was in the back. And I didn't know that, so I go out there and I'm on the stage, all of a sudden I can't see anything.
No. Oh,
and
my.
luckily that black light just shone enough light that I could get through the secret panel over there. But that was the scariest moment in my stage career. What I liked about it and what kept me doing it is there was a guy named Bob Schneider who was a big, like 300-pound guy that was just fabulous as an actor. He went to New York later on for a while. And he and I had this one little scene, and just playing with him in that one scene with the lines and doing a little different every night and playing, it just taught me what acting, how much fun it is, and what we get out of it as an actor, doing a performance one time after another, you know, one night after another. It was just so much fun. And when I got into this acting, teaching acting then too, a couple of years after directing at the high school, I introduced improv too, because I thought I'd read Viola Spolin's book, partly because of Jonathan Winters, and realized that she has this book on just called Improvisation for Theater. And I always recommend it to everybody. It still works pretty well. It's designed primarily for high school and grade school kids, but so much of it you can use. And so we would do, like back then it was about a 50-minute class, I guess. And I had 2 of those, and we would do a show at the end of every season, at the end of every semester rather. And then I had memorized scenes in the second class. But I was one of the first persons in the country really in a high school to use that. And we didn't have a auditorium in that high school, even though it became one of the wealthiest communities. They finally built one right after I left, of course. But they recently just built a whole new high school there in Westlake, Ohio. And they tore down all the old buildings that weren't that old, really, but all my past is just kind of wiped out there. But anyway, we didn't have an auditorium, so I thought, how do we get the school kids here in this school to know we're doing theater? You know, we go over to this junior high to do it, and they wouldn't see us working, you know. So we created this improv group called WIT, W-I-T, that I think Jake Darmont's theater is named after, to tell the truth, because I told him about this once, and his theater is W-I-T it's called Western Improvisational Theater or something, independent theater, and ours was called Westlake Improvisational Theater. But we had T-shirts and everything, and it just was the first thing of its kind, I think, in the country. Had a great time with that. I've gone off way on a tangent, but that's
Yeah, we answered about half the other questions.
Yes,
so,
I know.
But that's okay. We'll circle around back to
go
them.
like
That's
that.
okay.
It's an improvisational approach I take to interviews.
So it sounded like you started directing somewhat by accident almost in high school. Where do you feel, was that the beginning of your kind of serious being a director in a serious way or a formidable way?
It was.
Or did that come later?
The third play I did that first season was The Skin of Our Teeth. And I had taught that play before and really loved it. And I'd seen it at Miami. In fact, a lot of the things I did fairly early were the ones I saw at Miami University. Even before I knew Susan, I was going to some of those. So I started really getting into serious thing. And it was a period in high school history, really, where we were able to do quite a bit going into in the early 60s up to the 70s. And then they began to put a clamp on what you could do as far as language goes. So we were doing, especially in the realm of one acts, we would do Edward Albee's, some of his early stuff. And in fact, I talked to him one time. I just happened to meet him at a theater in Houston. Susan's sister lived in Houston. We went to this play, and there was Edward Albee standing by himself over there, and he had a play going on. He was their playwright in residence. And I tried to make conversation with him, and if you read his plays, you know probably what he's like, and I thought he would be like that. I thought he'd be a little more chatty. But I said, oh, you here? I'm just trying to make conversation. Are you here to see some actors, perhaps, in this production? And he said, no. I sometimes just come to see a play.
So, as a director, what draws you to scripts? What do you look for?
Well, in my later life here, I've taken to doing lighter things in the last few years, except for To Kill a Mockingbird. I just have so much fun doing them. But I really love serious theater. And the high school enabled me to do a lot of things. What would get me into it, and as a high school teacher, is I thought the plays I do with kids especially, it needs to be about something, you know? It can't just be a comedy. I love comedy, but a lot of the shows I would do were about something. And for example, when Nixon was president, going through all this stuff about lies of various kind, I did The Children's Hour, you know, by Lillian Hellman, which is on a kid's level, is really about the same thing that was going on. They made up this lie they thought about their teacher being a lesbian, you know, having a lesbian relationship. They didn't use that word, of course, back then. And in high school, particularly, I didn't have to edit anything, though. But it was a serious play, and these kids really took to it quite a bit. In fact, it verged on it being too perhaps emotional for them to some extent. These were high school kids, of course. But I would try to have something to do with what's going on if I could do that. And I succeeded in a lot of cases. You know. I still try to do that to some extent. The only one I kind of befuddled me, I usually have a long talk about this, and we discussed it, but with Spamalot, I didn't know quite what to say.
Yeah.
The fact is that it does really, in all the Monty Python stuff, always play up the class idea. And of course, it's there all the way through, making fun of the lower classes, but also making fun of the king and his upper class people. Right. It's on both sides. So, and that is a problem we have in our country, even though sometimes we don't admit to it. You know, it's been a problem with the British for a long time.
Yeah. I've had certainly a lot of conversations through the years about the advantages of a director either having been an actor or at least knowing the actor's process. We talk a lot about the actor's language and a director being able to speak the actor's language. You know, how do you communicate with actors?
Well, I learned, the one thing I left out in just the biog here is that I did take acting classes after I started teaching and directing, and at the school I can't remember at the moment. Okay. On the east side of Cleveland. Anyway, it'll come to me too. But I've read about everything there is on directing, you know, and acting as well. And then when I started teaching college particularly, I really got into that. And I think I can speak more to that now than I could before. I knew enough about it from the productions that I did to be able to talk to them. What I always need, I think, if I can do it, especially with a smaller cast, is just get out on the floor, sit down on the floor with them and do this. I can't do, as some directors do, sit in the first row or sit in the, well, I do sit in the first row, but not sit way back and, you know, with a table in front of me between them and look at them and take notes or something, you know, and then have talk with them later. I have to get down there with them. It helps me because as I'm getting older, I can't hear as well either, but at the same time, I can get up there and move to somebody, even take them over here and talk to them, you know, away from everybody else, and then come back. In my acting classes, they love this thing where you sit down on the floor like they, you know, these are college kids when I was teaching at Embry-Riddle, and also we're in the middle of that big auditorium there, but also in the big classroom at YC. And there you can communicate. You know, I don't know if it's really an actor's language. I think it's just language, you know, trying to communicate with them and become a listener, to see what you can have happen. Some of the simple exercises we use so often, you just start them up with these actors and let them learn from it. I found out from teaching high school that you can't really speak to them very much. You've got to do stuff, you know. And so that's how improv really helped me, because I was constantly having them do things that demonstrated some of the elements of acting that we did.
So in the classroom, I mean, certainly understand the value of improvisation when you're working on a show, because
Yeah.
sometimes an actor just is not getting something, and that's a good way to get them to do it. But in the classroom, how does it differ from using written material? Because I'm sure at some point you use written material that they have to memorize, you know, doing a scene. But what are the
I found
advantages
out
of using improv?
pretty early in doing that with high school kids that I couldn't put the two together. I just was not good at doing that. It just didn't work. So I had an improv classes separate, and then the memorized scenes, and it seemed to work out better. I could have them use some of those improvs. I'm kind of overemphasizing maybe the improv. I got into that partly because I was so much interested in that. When I started this theater in North Ridgeville, I wanted to have an improv group, but I couldn't sell that idea to anybody. So we started doing some things by the originators of improv. Paul Sills, who did Story Theater, and then we did the sequel to that. We were so successful with Story Theater. It's a wonderful thing where you have those children's stories. It's basically just you can do this with anything, just taking a children's book if you can have the rights to it, but the old ones, you know, don't have any rights any longer, the fairy tales, divide it up and have different people tell different parts of that story while the actors are acting it out. And that was so much fun. We had a guy that could imitate everybody. It was a great President Kennedy for one thing, and we have these, and you know, all kinds of famous actors too, and you put those into those little slots of the fairy tales, and it would just be hilarious. So I did, especially when I got to college teaching in theater back at Embry-Riddle 10 years ago, or more. I got into this trying to put these things together, and we found, it was interesting there because we found that Embry-Riddle has an awful lot of pilots, of course. It's a flight school, but it's also, because my son teaches there, it's also a scientific-based school as well, the engineering school. And so you have, I would pay attention to this because it's just interesting what it says about human beings. The actors in my class would be really good at improvisation, or it seemed analyzing a script and taking notes and doing all of that. And you can kind of guess which group was which. The ones that were great in improvisation were which ones? The pilots. And isn't that what you want? You know, I mean, you want them to know what they're doing, and it was the engineers, primarily the engineers, that loved to do the other. And so I had a hard time getting them to do this analysis on paper that I have them do of the characters among the pilots. They were just more open as actors, though, when they got up there. But the engineers, they knew how to take the notes. They memorized their parts, while the others were kind of winging it sometimes. And it just taught me a lot about that. I thought that was a stereotype to some extent before, but as we say, sometimes stereotypes are true, aren't they? So I found a different way to mix them, and in the classes at YC particularly, I've had a lot of luck in recent years with men being in the classes, boys, you know. In the past, my drama classes in high school were a lot of women, you know, a lot of girls at that time, because there weren't any sports for women back then, and they were thought to be, oh, this is the thing for them, or maybe music, you know. And of course now, there's as many sports, or maybe even more sometimes in some areas, for girls than there were in the past, and the boys seem now to gravitate to theater a lot, especially comedy. And we've had, in the last few years, some really talented kids that you might have seen in Spamalot. I had these great guys that could do Monty Python. They're you know, 18 to 21 in there, and they know Monty Python. Now, that was back in the 60s when that first stuff started. So I know I'm wandering again a little bit here, but the times have really changed, and you kind of have to adapt to that. I started using this handbook from David Mamet, and his students had written a handbook based on him teaching a class in Montpelier, Vermont years ago. And I really liked this. It was just a simple way to approach a role. At the same time, it lent itself to complexity. The actors could go deeper in the character than they might have otherwise. The problem with that is that now, about 8 years after I started doing that, using that text, David Mamet, who's always talking, he came out and wrote a new book. And he said, just forget everything I wrote before. It's garbage. He said. Well, I don't think he was really right. I mean, it's not the only approach to it, but I felt sorry for the people that wrote the handbook were students of his from that seminar that he did, and they went and they formed one of the best theaters going in New York now, and I don't remember the name of the company now. But here he comes out with this book that goes against their whole thing. You can see them in the theater magazines advertising, you know, the David Mamet's method or whatever, and now he's saying that it's garbage.
Wow. Well,
he's sort of crazy to
yeah,
begin
it's not
with.
all that unusual. I mean, Stanislavski, you know, through all the years that he was working on it, he kept evolving all the things that he was talking about, and threw out a lot of things that he did early on and kept
There's a
things later
big
on.
difference between his early work and the later work. In fact, the whole argument that went on in the United States between theater teachers was based on whether they read the first book or the second book. You know.
Right.
And some of them, the people that coached Marlon Brando, for example, he denied a lot of that later on, but they really wanted to stick straight to that. That was their Bible. And then some of their proteges later on, they followed the second book, and they called it a big split between those organizations. Where I think they were just people that wanted to start off doing something that was really creative and so on, and made it as rigid as what they were trying to get away from. You know, I've kind of always liked the idea, the British idea that Laurence Olivier used to talk about, of working from the outside in. You know, I can see how that works with some actors, but today, I mean, we don't have to say there's just one method to use.
No, not
the
at all.
other could be used, and you see the British actors all the time, who are some of the greatest actors in the world, I think. They combine those things, and they have for quite a while. I think the reason I like the British so much, and I've done quite a few British plays over the years, is because the actor there isn't a celebrity. They go and they take all kinds of roles. You'll see somebody in one company will do a major role, you know, and everybody will talk about that perhaps and review that. But he'll be in the next show, if they're doing a repertory, in a small part. And he'll take that part without any. And you see these guys, they can go from one show to another. They become the people that they are. And not too many American actors become the people that they seem to be there. Al Pacino's tried it a lot, but now he's just kind of going into the stereotype of Al Pacino.
In terms of U.S. actors, I think it's more a lot of the actors who are not necessarily under the radar, but don't get the top billing, like Chris Cooper, for example.
Yes.
He changes all the time. And
he's one of my favorites, actually.
You know, you could look at him and never realize it's the same person.
I know.
You know, he's one of those kinds of people. What qualities do you look for in actors when you're casting a show?
I was kidding Kathy over there about talking about casting by height. You know, it would be a lot easier if we could do that.
Absolutely.
And in a way, and some of the people in my chorus, I did cast by height to try to, because I wanted Kathy in Spamalot, and then who else? I'd have to balance her on stage with somebody.
Right.
So who am I going to get? And I had Carol. What's Carol's last name?
Albrecht.
Albrecht. Was wonderful in that show, but she could balance her. You know, I go into casting really. I know people think we already know who we want when we go into that, but we don't as directors.
We don't.
We go in there and we in fact, I mean, I've read through the play quite a few times, but I don't cast it in my head. You know, I had some people tell me one way to really read a play well is to cast it, you know, with actors that you know about, maybe actors that you're working with or actors that you've seen on the screen. But that narrows it down so much that I'll never be able to cast a show that way. You know, you're never going to find the whole cast that way. So I like to stay open to that. And there's always somebody that surprises me, and always somebody surprises me in something they can do. So I guess it's just to be as open-minded as you can about those particular roles. I think that helps you if you can do that. Now, sometimes you do have certain things you want from an actor. You want kind of a deadpan delivery if you're doing some of Monty Python stuff, for example, or you want somebody that just can go wild, you know, in a thing. That's why when I have auditions, I like to do a reading first, and then after that I'll do an improv with those people to see what they actually can do beyond the script, because I can't always tell from that. I know a lot of people like monologues, but it takes a lot of time, and I don't hate to do that, but I'd rather use a reading first and then do an improv so I can see what they can do. I made a mistake, I think one of the first years I directed at a high school. This girl came on and she could just read this part just so beautifully. And she was right looking for the part and everything. I gave her the part, but that was as good as she ever became, what she did there. And so that's why I like to use the improv, to see how fast they can think, for one thing. It's good for comedy. While I had a girl who was wonderful in comedy, but she had a hard time reading it, you know, and it would just be stilted. Maybe a monologue would be a good thing in that particular case, though, where somebody could rehearse it. So I'm fudging on that a little bit. I think the primary thing is just to be as open as you can to it. And the same thing with the script. Know that there are a lot of different ways to play this, probably. I'm sure there's some things that are narrower than others, but and that could be so much of the fun of it, too. All of a sudden you think, oh, why didn't I think of this before? Look at the way this girl can do this, or this guy can do this.
Talk a little bit about you as the artistic director, managing director of the Old Town Hall in Cleveland. How did that come about? What were your duties? Were you paid?
That was what my mother asked me. She said one time, she said, I was talking to Beulah, who was my aunt, and sort of the old school aunt, you know, and she had evidently asked her, does Bruce get paid for this? And so my mother wanted to know, so she could tell Beulah. And I said, yeah, I was paid for it, but it was only about like $600 a year, I think it was, in that little theater. We had this Old Town Hall that was in the middle of North Ridgeville, Ohio. I usually just say a suburb of Cleveland because it sounds like really the Hickville, you know. But it was just out beyond the Cuyahoga County line. And Westlake was over here, which had all kinds of money. In fact, it was a farm community when I started then. And then all of a sudden I looked up one day and there were mansions all around everywhere. Wow. But North Ridgeville was just kind of static. It was part of Lorain County where the steel mills had all failed, you know, and so there wasn't too much going on there. Suze was teaching in the schools there too. I don't know if you were teaching there before I went into the Old Town Hall or not, but somebody had put a thing in the paper saying that they were going to have an organization meeting for this theater, and they'd already done some work on the building. One of them was they sandblasted the brick building, which completely killed all the brick, you know, and so that when you do that, all of a sudden organisms can creep in there, and you could like put your fingers through some of the bricks. A stupid thing to do. So if you're redoing a building, don't do that. But anyway, we saw a lot of in this upper story auditorium a way to do this, and it had a rake level floor for the audience. A lot of those old buildings that were over 100 years old had a flat floor, just like like the church basically does, you know. And then they built that thing. So I went in there, and there was a neighbor that I knew who wanted to do children's theater, and both of us kind of just saw each other across the room, and everything that the people have been talking about was just so unorganized. We thought we got to somehow get this together, because it would be a good thing for Lorain County, and we could get a lot of people coming across. There was Huntington Playhouse just across the border, and Clegg Playhouse and Westlake, and a few little of these playhouses we knew pretty well. So I just started in that, and then I said we need to do shows in that space. They were, in order to make money, they were doing it at an elementary school or that had a stage. They were doing Godspell and some good productions. There were some good actors out there, but I didn't feel like they were publicizing the building enough. They were just saying, let's get out of there and go over here. So I said, we got to do stuff there. So that was actually, I'd done as my first musical at the high school, I'd done the Fantastics. And I did the Music Man later there. And So I thought we'll do that. We'll do the Fantastics there, which would be perfect for this bare little square stage. And as a result of that, then they said, why don't you become managing director, which was their overall term for that. And so I agreed, and we got into this. And at one time or another, our whole family was involved in it. We were the box. You know, somebody would not do something, and we'd take it on. You know about that. You have to do that quite a bit. And we became the box office. And so we'd come home from school, and we'd be answering the phone, you know. You almost wished for a show that wasn't a hit, you know. When we got to Fiddler on the Roof, though, it was just, oh, God, that was a huge show, and we constantly had to turn people away. But my daughter and my son both would all four of us answer the phone. And we would do, Susan did work on the sets even for me, artistic work. And Maggie was my daughter was one of the music directors on, just before she graduated. She was really talented in music and piano and vocal music. I had a great vocal teacher there. And so she did another show I'm not going to remember, Little Shop of Horrors, which was a great show for us, and a very, very good show. Anyway, my son played the drums in Grease. He was a great drummer, you know. The best memory I have of that was that he, one night, I guess it was the last show, you know, and how these rock and roll drummers like to jump off of their platforms to come down on the last note. And he does this. He goes up, and we had a movie of it. He goes up in the air, and he comes back down, and he misses the stool. Oh, no. All of a sudden, he just disappears there. But we all were involved in that, and that's one thing we wanted. We wanted to kind of bring some culture out there to North Ridgeville, Ohio. And I did that for 20 years. After a while, I was just getting too old to climb the 20-foot ladder to change the lights. I began to think, no one's doing this, you know. I had broken some ribs once falling off the stage, and there wasn't anybody to go up there and do it. And I finally did find somebody who was brave enough. He went white to the lips when he did it, but you didn't have any catwalk, so you had to climb up that thing, leaning it against the bar. So I thought, we wanted to move, and so a year early we just sort of opted out of the whole thing, and they had a big thing for me. They actually named the theater the Lanning Auditorium, where it still is in North Ridgeville, Ohio. So it's still going, and had a little trouble with leadership for a while, because when you have somebody that's been in charge of everything for a long time leave, then all of a sudden people that always got along all of a sudden start fighting. But they resolved that, and now it's going. They've got some good money from the government. Redo, you know, you have these old ceilings, the floors, and windows that go bad, and all this stuff. They put in air conditioning, and in an old building, it doesn't do a very good job, I don't think. But anyway, that I really got a kick out of that whole job. I mean, you can see it in my home. I have a thing signed by the Senate of the state of Ohio, you know, thanking us for doing that work. And both of us are listed, my wife Susan and I.
Very nice. What are your plans, expectations with the upcoming show that you'll be directing at PCA in May, Boeing?
Boeing.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Been working on it the last week again, because I'll read the thing a few times, and then I'll stop and come back to it. And now I've gotten the play, and I want to do the following year pretty much. So now I can go back to working on it. I don't know. It's just I know I was in college in the '60s, and I'm pretty clear about the way things were then, you know, and the dress too. And I don't know if you like Mad Men, if you've watched the series Mad Men, but I watched every single one of those. I love that series, and I actually like the fashions a lot of the beginning of that period. You know, the early '60s were quite different than after '64, '65. And this Boeing takes place in about '61. So I don't know if people approach this, whether you do this or not, but I start with the music so often that I want to use for the show. It's a very fast-moving show. I'd seen it a couple of years ago at the Shakespeare Festival in Utah, and it was just a wonderful version of it. But Susan and I were watching this thing, and we were exhausted afterwards. It's the fastest running show with 7 doors in it. We've talked to Ed about 7 doors, for God's sake, we got to have, that all work. But it's hilarious because of how anachronistic it is. I mean, the women are treated as sex objects. The guys are pretty much stereotypes. The women are stereotypes for different countries, and one's an American, one's from Italy, okay, and the funniest one of all is the one from Germany, and so she is just hilarious. But she's sort of like a stewardess if she was a Nazi. You know? Now they call them stewardesses then too, and of course they do in the play, and one's from each of those countries' airlines, and that don't exist anymore. I don't know if any of them do, but it's just I've watched Randy Faulkner's our sort of resident farceur, I guess you would call him. You know, he's done so many of these, and the last one he did here, the last
Don't Dress for
farce.
Dinner.
Don't Dress for Dinner, which was written by the same writer.
Mark Camilletti, right?
Yeah, and it's done in a translation. The thing that brought it back, because it was written before the other play that we'd already done, was a New York production that came from England, as almost all of them do. And this guy who is a great British actor, I always want to memorize his name and then I don't do it. But he did Jerusalem. Some of you know about Jerusalem, a very serious play about these guys that live in a trailer park. And he did that in England, and it was huge for him, made him a star. And then he did this play, Boeing, Boeing. We saw it in Utah with a really young cast, but he's middle-aged. Now, if you saw, what's the new Tom Hanks movie?
Oh, The Bridge of Spies?
Yeah, The Bridge of Spies. He is the actor that plays the spy that they trade for the American who went down in flames there over Russia. And I don't know if you liked him there. He's almost transparent. You see him as that character. You never see him as anything else. And here he's playing in this farce, in this mad farce, playing this goofy guy. You know. Well, it did so well in England that they moved it to the United States with the same director as Michael Warkus, I think his name is, who's just been doing fabulous work, evidently. And that show he did. And he created a lot of new stuff for it. So now it's been released. Everybody's doing it around the country and have the last few years. At first I thought, oh, it's just going to be another thing. You know, it was made into a movie after the play with Jerry Lewis in it and Tony Curtis. Now, have you ever seen it? Anybody ever seen it? I haven't. I don't want to see it because I just can't imagine it very good. They probably softened it up so much. But you see it runs so fast. I found an old couple of songs from the 60s. One is done in French, which I kind of get a kick out of because that starts the thing. We think of it as an American song. The Locomotion, you remember the Locomotion? Mm-hmm. Well, it's done in, I found a French version. It's just very good. I think it may have even started there. I don't know that song. And then a Bobby, what's his name? Not Bobby Vinton, but, Bobby yeah. And he had and he was kind of a Frank Sinatra kind of guy, but he did rock and roll too. Right. And I found this really fast-moving song of his, Irresistible You. It just works so well on this, I think. But it picks up that speed. That's what I mean. I try to find something that will give me the feeling for that, and I can go back to that all the time as I'm directing and see if I can keep that going. Did a pretty good job, I think, with Spamalot, keeping that thing running, and it was like a huge machine, you know. But this one is going to take the actors that I hope I can get for this. It's going to take the most energy of your lifetime to do this and keep moving. Physical energy, but comic energy too, because you're leaping over furniture and on each other and all kinds of stuff. So come and see it.
Absolutely. We are getting close to wrapping up, so I'm going to open it up to the audience. If anybody has any questions, Jim's going to grab the microphone there. So does anybody have any questions of Bruce?
I just about covered it, huh?
Bruce, you talked about the comedy bits you did. You didn't mention your Victor Borga bit.
Yeah, he was an idol of mine just because I played the piano, you know. And I did a talent show where I did this, and I was the only one that was doing comedy, so they put me on it. And I remember this was the tragic part of my life. Getting up, it was just a one-night thing, and I started this thing, and it was in this auditorium, a nice one for Fairview, where I went to high school. And there was just dead silence, just dead silence. Wow. And so I whipped into the music pretty fast. But then I took it to a high school thing one night, and
Where
it was
I
like
taught.
one of we used to have dances, you know, and afterwards, it was some kind of it wasn't a senior party, but it was some kind of a party. I don't remember what it was. And we had a stage, and different people were doing stuff. And so I went up and did this, and separated it from the piano, because the piano was down on the floor and I was up here. And I did a bunch of just stuff, just rip-offs of other people. There was a comedian years ago who just would talk real crazy, and then he would be standing up and he would have a pocket of confetti. I don't know if you ever remember him. It was on the Ed Sullivan Show. Anybody remember him?
Who?
And,
Rip Torn?
no,
Maybe.
I don't know.
Oh no, Rip Torn's an actor.
No, it wasn't an actor.
Dub Taylor, Rip Taylor, Rip Taylor.
This was before Rip Taylor, I think. But he would just punctuate the thing by just going like this, and the stuff, and he'd look up wondering where this came from. And so I used that to punctuate that, and it was a big success. So they asked me to do another one, and that one I had written a yearbook at Al Capone High School, and so I did stuff from that, and I just loved that. Of course, that was your own people, your school, and everything, and I had a great reaction. One time, I did a Jonathan Winters thing. He used to do Maud Frickert,
Oh yes.
and so I could do that pretty well at that time. And I was plugging something that was going on in the school, so I went down in the center of the school, you know, where they have the microphone, and you could hear the sound all over the school. And I did this thing about Maud Frickert, and she was going to this thing, and the guy's interviewing, a friend of mine, Paul Maximuk, was interviewing me, and finally the punchline was that, you know, what do you do for a living? Well, I'm a cab driver, you know, and that was a huge laugh back then. There are women cab drivers now, but I could hear the laugh all around the school.
Wow.
You know, in that echoey kind of thing.
Wow.
Everybody was in there in homeroom, you know, and I just thought I was living the great life. You know?
Nice.
And that's the kind of thing I want. I still love comedy for that reason, but you reach a point where you want to go further. You want to go deeper, do deeper work.
Sure.
And I've been able to do that in a lot of stuff.
Nice.
When I first saw Boing Boing, I was a big Jerry Lewis fan, and it was the 60s,
Yeah.
and I had that mindset. Do you have to get that mindset to direct it?
Not Jerry Lewis, but I don't want that mindset. Well, no, you know, Jerry Lewis, actually, when I was a kid, he was on the Colgate Comedy Hour back in the 50s, and everybody loved going to see that, because he was one of the first ones. Red Skelton had done some of it, but where he just messed everything up, you know. He would do a thing with Dean Martin, and Dean Martin's trying to sing, and he would mess the whole thing up. And then he got into movies and everything. And it's a problem with comedians a lot of times, that some acts don't work when you're middle-aged or old. And that's what happened to Jerry Lewis, it seems to me. He couldn't do that any longer. And the French still love him.
Hey, lady.
I know. He did a couple of his first movies by himself that were very, very artistic kind of movies. The Bellboy, I think, is a real classic, because it's just black and white, just his comedy sticks, one after another, without anything else. That was a classic. But after that,
I have a question about when you choose your actors, when you choose your cast.
yeah, what?
You said that you're pretty open and that you just see what the people will give you. Is there anything that someone auditioning would give you that you'd say, absolutely not, you're not going to be in my show, that would just turn you off immediately?
That's an interesting question. I don't think so. I mean, if it was completely inappropriate for that particular character, but if I was having just an open audition with having people try, well, usually when I do an improv, I take a situation or a couple lines out of the show and use that to see how they're going to relate to one another. I think that's something you can't find out from monologues and the others, how these people relate. Almost everybody that writes about acting now says that, you know, acting really is about how you relate to that other person and what you do in regard to that other person. And I don't think anybody disagrees with that any longer. It's where you live or die as far as an actor goes, especially in serious plays. I can't think of anybody.
So if they didn't relate, you might not choose them for the part.
If they what?
If they didn't relate to the other actor.
If they didn't relate to, yeah. If they didn't, or were trying to, I'm trying to think of an example. I don't want to name names here in this case, but I remember one of these things one time where I was doing this was a reading, not an improv, and the two actors were, one really experienced actor and one new actor, an actress, and I thought she had a lot of promise. Well, the other actor, he was trying to get her to speed up, and so he would turn this way, and he would go over toward her and say, "Speed up, speed up," like this. And that thing was pretty noticeable, and that kind of trying to intimidate the other person would have been that kind of situation to me. But I can't think of very many others like that.
Is there one thing that you look for in an actor above everything else? One characteristic or one trait?
It's a tough question, too. I want it all. A friend of mine says, I want the whole package. I don't know if there is just one thing. I guess it's their concentration more than anything else. And obviously, creativity is really a general term, I know. But we kind of want that. We want to see something that's just a fresh reading of even a play we've got kind of figured out in our head, If somebody can surprise me in some way, that's really good. And Carol was one of my students. She could surprise me quite a bit.
I would, if it's okay, I would supplement that answer by, as you're saying, surprising, showing, because I've got an idea of what I want to see when I'm casting a show, but if someone shows me something I've not thought of that will work for the character, that's a big thing for me. The inventiveness, the creativity.
When you've done a lot of shows, too, you're not easily surprised any longer.
Right.
I've done something like directed 120 productions now, I think, over many years, and that's not counting high school shows and stuff like that. So I think that is a good point. I do want people that will really listen to one another. When you're doing this is something we all teach in the classes, but when you're an actor, you've got to repeat the same lines night after night after night, And how do you keep that alive? And how do you keep, even if you didn't have to do that alive, is to really listen to that other person, even though you're saying the same lines, and try to meet what that person is doing. If that person is now, tonight, he's being a little ironic about that, that's new to you here, you're going to change your response to that in some fashion. And that's what makes it really exciting, I think, for an actor, because you get to do those things. So I'm sure there are dull moments in any role. If you're a spear carrier or something in Macbeth or something, I don't know what I would do in that case. I would imagine, how could I kill that guy over there?
Yeah.
But that kind of thing, instead of just sitting there, you've got something going on. You've got to have a relationship with somebody else, or maybe more than one, but at least one other person in that scene. You look at most plays, they're really two people that each scene is about, I think, more than anything else.
Right. So on that note, I think we're getting ready to wrap up. Thank you very much for being here.
Well, thanks for
thanks
all of you
everybody
coming,
for
too, and
being in the audience here.
encouraging me here.
And we'll hopefully see you in December 15th, to talk with Jonathan Best. See you next time.